Sarah Mitchell walked through the busy halls of Boeing's Seattle facility, her engineering badge swaying with each step. At 28, she had already earned respect as one of the company's brightest aerospace engineers. Her colleagues knew her for solving complex aircraft design problems and her quiet dedication to her work. What they didn't know was the secret that lived in a locked drawer of her apartment. Every morning, Sarah would grab her coffee and review technical specifications for commercial aircraft. She would spend hours analyzing wing designs, fuel efficiency calculations, and safety protocols. Her supervisor often praised her intuitive understanding of flight mechanics, though he never questioned where this knowledge came from. Sarah would simply smile and return to her computer screen, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she refined another design. The truth was far more extraordinary than anyone could imagine. During her college years at MIT, Sarah had been selected for a classified military program. While her classmates spent summers at internships or traveling, Sarah disappeared for months at a time. Her family believed she was working on special research projects. In reality, she was training to become one of the most skilled fighter pilots in the world. The program was so secret that only a handful of people knew it existed. Sarah had been chosen not just for her engineering brilliance, but for her exceptional reflexes and spatial awareness. Military psychologists had identified her as having the rare combination of technical knowledge and natural flying ability that made for an elite pilot. For 3 summers, she trained on increasingly advanced aircraft, culminating in certification to fly the F-22 Raptor. After graduation, Sarah made a difficult choice. Instead of pursuing a military career, she decided to return to civilian life. The program allowed this, understanding that having their trained pilots in various positions could be valuable for national security. Sarah signed agreements that bound her to secrecy about her training, but also made her available for emergency situations. Now, 5 years later, that training felt like a distant dream. Sarah had built a comfortable life in Seattle. She owned a small apartment with a view of the mountains, had a close group of friends from work, and was dating Mark, a kind software engineer who made her laugh. Her flying skills remained sharp through monthly flights in a small Cessna, which she told everyone was just a hobby. The locked drawer in her bedroom contained her flight suit, helmet, and military identification cards. Sometimes late at night, Sarah would open the drawer and run her fingers over the fabric of the suit. She would remember the feeling of pulling G-forces in a steep climb, the precision required to land on an aircraft carrier, and the incredible power of the F-22's engines. Those memories felt both vivid and unreal, like scenes from someone else's life. Her friends often joked about her mysterious past. They noticed how she could identify any aircraft by sound alone, how she never got motion sick, and how she always seemed to know exactly where she was, even in unfamiliar places. Sarah would laugh off their questions, changing the subject to work projects or weekend plans. She had become expert at deflecting curiosity while maintaining close friendships. At work, Sarah's projects focused on improving passenger safety and comfort. She took pride in knowing that her designs would help families travel safely around the world. Yet sometimes, when reviewing military aircraft specifications that crossed her desk, she felt a familiar excitement. Her heart would beat faster as she analyzed the technical details, remembering how it felt to pilot such machines. The most challenging part of keeping her secret was the isolation it created. Sarah couldn't share one of her greatest accomplishments with the people she cared about most. When friends talked about their proudest moments or biggest challenges, Sarah would think of her first solo flight in an F-22, but she would share stories about college engineering competitions instead. Mark had begun talking about their future together, mentioning marriage and children. Sarah loved him deeply, but wondered how she could build a life with someone who didn't know such a fundamental part of who she was. She had considered telling him multiple times, but her security agreements were clear about the consequences of unauthorized disclosure. As she settled into her evening routine, Sarah had no idea that everything was about to change. Her phone sat silently on the kitchen counter, but soon it would ring with a call that would thrust her back into the world she had left behind. The quiet life she had built was about to collide with the extraordinary skills she had worked so hard to keep hidden. The next morning would bring news that would make her secret training not just relevant, but absolutely critical. Sarah went to sleep that night as a civilian engineer, unaware that she would soon be called upon to be something much more dangerous and vital to national security. The phone rang at 3:47 a.m., cutting through Sarah's deep sleep like a knife. She fumbled in the darkness, her engineering mind automatically noting the unusual hour. Unknown numbers at this time usually meant emergencies or wrong numbers. The voice on the other end made her blood run cold. Echo 77, this is command. Authentication code Whiskey Tango 99. The military precision in the speaker's voice transported Sarah instantly back to her training days. Her sleepy confusion vanished, replaced by sharp alertness. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding as muscle memory kicked in. Authentication confirmed, Sarah responded automatically, using the protocols burned into her memory. She glanced at Mark sleeping beside her, grateful he was a heavy sleeper. The voice continued with clinical efficiency, delivering information that would shatter her carefully constructed civilian life. A terrorist organization had seized control of an experimental aircraft carrying a biological weapon over the Pacific Northwest. The plane was heading toward Seattle, and traditional military response was complicated by the weapon's volatility. Any aggressive action could release the biological agent over populated areas. They needed someone who could get close enough to disable the aircraft without triggering the weapon's release mechanism. Sarah's mind raced as she processed the implications. Her unique combination of civilian engineering knowledge and military flying expertise made her the only person who could understand both the aircraft's vulnerabilities and how to exploit them safely. The caller explained that she had 20 minutes to reach a classified location where an F-22 was waiting. Moving silently through her apartment, Sarah opened the locked drawer with trembling hands. The flight suit felt strange against her skin after 5 years, but her body remembered its weight and fit. She caught her reflection in the bedroom mirror and hardly recognized herself. The quiet engineer was gone, replaced by someone harder and more focused. Mark stirred as she gathered her keys. "Sarah, where are you going so early?" His sleepy voice filled her with guilt and longing. She kissed his forehead gently, knowing this moment might change everything between them forever. "Emergency at work," she whispered, hating the lie but bound by laws she couldn't break. The drive to the coordinates took 18 minutes through empty Seattle streets. Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel as she mentally reviewed F-22 systems and combat procedures. The skills came flooding back with startling clarity, as if the 5 years of civilian life had been just a brief intermission in her real story. The facility appeared to be an abandoned warehouse, but Sarah recognized the subtle signs of military operation: vehicles with government plates, carefully positioned security, and the particular way personnel moved with contained urgency. She was expected. A uniformed officer led her through what looked like empty offices into a hidden elevator that descended much deeper than any commercial building should go. The underground hangar took her breath away. The F-22 Raptor sat under bright lights like a sleeping predator, its angular surfaces reflecting light in ways that made it seem almost alien. Ground crew moved around it with practiced efficiency, and Sarah felt the familiar mixture of awe and excitement that these machines always inspired in her. "Sarah Mitchell, reporting as ordered," she announced to the commanding officer, a stern woman who looked like she had seen too many crises. The briefing was rapid and thorough. The hijacked aircraft was a prototype cargo plane carrying an experimental biological research sample. The terrorists had modified the cargo, hold with a dispersal system that would activate if the plane was shot down or if anyone tried to board it. The only solution was to disable the aircraft's engines from another plane, forcing it to land safely while avoiding the trigger mechanisms for the biological weapon. Sarah would need to fly close enough to target specific engine components with precise laser guidance, requiring skills that existed in maybe a dozen pilots worldwide. "Ma'am, I need to know exactly what biological agent we're dealing with," Sarah said, her engineering training demanding complete information. The answer made her stomach drop. It was a weaponized version of a virus that could spread through air contact, with a mortality rate that could devastate any city it reached. As she walked toward the F-22, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Thousands of lives depended on her ability to execute a mission that pushed the limits of both human skill and aircraft capability. The ground crew helped her into the cockpit, and suddenly the 5 years melted away completely. Her hands moved across the controls with instinctive precision. Engine startup procedures, weapon systems checks, communication protocols. Everything flowed naturally despite the long absence. The F-22 responded to her touch like a faithful partner welcoming her home. "Tower, Echo 7. 7 ready for immediate departure, Sarah spoke into her headset, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. As the aircraft began to move toward the runway, she thought of Mark waking up alone, of her colleagues who would wonder where she had gone, of the life she might not return to. The F-22 lifted off into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying Sarah toward a confrontation that would test every skill she had ever learned and force her to risk everything she had built in her civilian life. The F-22 climbed through the dark sky at incredible speed, Seattle's lights shrinking below until they looked like scattered diamonds. Sarah's hands moved across the controls with renewed confidence as her training fully awakened. The aircraft responded perfectly to her commands, its powerful engines carrying her toward an uncertain confrontation. Air traffic control vectored her toward the stolen aircraft's last known position over the Cascade Mountains. Sarah activated the F-22's advanced radar systems, scanning for the target while maintaining radio contact with ground command. The early morning air was smooth, but she knew conditions would become much more challenging once she engaged with the hijacked plane. Echo 77. Target acquired bearing 270, altitude 22,000 feet, Sarah reported as her radar locked onto the stolen aircraft. The prototype cargo plane appeared on her display as a slow-moving blip, seemingly peaceful despite the deadly threat it carried. Sarah began calculating approach angles and attack vectors, her engineering background helping her understand the precise targeting required. The biological weapons dispersal system had been designed by the terrorists to activate under specific conditions. Any sudden decompression, violent maneuvers, or direct weapons impact would trigger the release mechanism. Sarah needed to disable the engines gradually, forcing the aircraft into a controlled descent rather than an immediate crash. The margin for error was essentially zero. As she closed distance with the target, Sarah activated her laser targeting system. The F-22's precision weapons were designed for exactly this type of surgical strike. But the technical challenge was unlike anything she had trained for. She would need to hit specific engine components in sequence, timing each strike to allow the aircraft to maintain enough power for a safe landing. Command. I have visual contact with the target, Sarah radioed as the stolen aircraft came into view. The cargo plane looked ordinary, except for unusual modifications visible on its exterior. The terrorists had clearly spent considerable time preparing for this operation, adding external equipment that Sarah assumed was part of the biological weapon system. Her headset crackled with updates from ground command. Military analysts were tracking the aircraft's projected path, which would take it directly over Seattle's metropolitan area in approximately 40 minutes. The population density along that route meant millions of potential casualties if the biological weapon was released. Sarah felt the weight of those lives as she began her approach. The stolen aircraft's crew had not yet noticed her presence. Sarah used the F-22's stealth capabilities to position herself for the optimal attack angle, staying below the cargo plane's radar signature while calculating precise targeting solutions. Her engineering knowledge proved crucial as she analyzed the aircraft's design to identify the most vulnerable engine components. Beginning engagement sequence, Sarah announced, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She armed the laser targeting system and selected the first target point on the aircraft's port engine. The laser would need to penetrate specific housing components without causing catastrophic failure that might trigger the biological weapons release. The first laser burst struck exactly where Sarah had aimed, causing visible damage to the engine's cowling. The stolen aircraft immediately began losing power on the left side, but remained stable and airborne. Sarah monitored the target's response, ensuring the damage was sufficient to begin forcing a descent without causing the violent decompression that would trigger the weapon system. However, the terrorists had finally detected her presence. The cargo plane began evasive maneuvers, turning sharply and attempting to shake Sarah's pursuit. The pilot was skilled, using the larger aircraft's surprising agility to complicate Sarah's targeting solutions. Sarah had to adapt quickly, using her superior speed and maneuverability to maintain position. The chase evolved into a deadly dance through the mountain valleys, with Sarah pursuing the damaged cargo plane while attempting to line up additional targeting opportunities. The stolen aircraft's crew was clearly determined to reach their intended target, even with one engine failing. Sarah realized they might be willing to trigger the biological weapon rather than allow capture. Echo 77, be advised that target aircraft is now heading directly toward downtown Seattle, ground command reported. You have approximately 25 minutes before potential weapon deployment over populated areas. The urgency in the controller's voice reflected the growing desperation of the situation. Sarah pushed the F-22 harder, using every bit of its performance capability to close distance with the fleeing aircraft. She needed to disable the second engine soon, but the terrorists' evasive maneuvers were making precise targeting extremely difficult. The mountain terrain added another layer of complexity, requiring split-second navigation decisions while maintaining weapons lock. As she maneuvered for another attack run, Sarah caught sight of Seattle's skyline in the distance. The city where she had built her civilian life was now depending on skills she had tried to leave behind. The irony was not lost on her as she prepared for the most critical targeting sequence of her life. The stolen aircraft suddenly changed course again, diving toward a narrow mountain valley in what appeared to be a desperate attempt to escape. Sarah followed, her F-22 screaming through the confined space as she fought to maintain targeting position, while avoiding the rocky walls that seemed to close in around them. The mountain valley created a terrifying canyon of rock and shadow, as both aircraft plunged through the narrow space. Sarah's F-22 screamed through the confined area at dangerous speeds, the rocky walls flashing past her cockpit in a blur of gray stone. The stolen cargo plane ahead of her was using the terrain as cover, hoping the tight quarters would prevent her from achieving a clean weapons lock. Sarah's training kicked into overdrive as she navigated the treacherous passage. Her hands moved instinctively across the controls, making micro-adjustments to keep the F-22 stable while maintaining pursuit. The valley walls were so close she could see individual trees and rock formations, creating a sense of speed that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The cargo plane suddenly pulled up sharply. Trying to clear a ridge that blocked the valley's exit, Sarah followed, her more maneuverable aircraft easily matching the climb. But the sudden altitude change had disrupted her targeting solution. She needed to reacquire the target quickly before the terrorists reached populated areas. As they cleared the mountain ridge, Sarah found herself looking down at farmland and small communities that dotted the landscape between the mountains and Seattle. The sight of houses and schools below reinforced the urgency of her mission. Every second of delay brought the biological weapon closer to innocent people who had no idea of the threat approaching from above. Echo 7-7. Target analysis shows the starboard engine is your priority. Ground command transmitted. Intel suggests the biological dispersal system draws power from that engine. Disable it and the weapon may become inert. This new information changed Sarah's tactical approach. Instead of gradually degrading both engines, she needed to focus on completely shuttering the right engine while keeping the left one functional enough for an emergency landing. Sarah repositioned herself for a different attack angle, using her superior speed to overtake the cargo plane and then swing back for a head-on approach. This maneuver was extremely dangerous, as it required perfect timing to avoid collision while delivering a precise laser strike. The closure rate between the two aircraft would be enormous, giving her only a split second to fire. The cargo plane's crew seemed to realize what she was attempting. They began more aggressive, evasive maneuvers, rolling and diving in ways that pushed their larger aircraft to its structural limits. Sarah could see stress fractures beginning to appear in the cargo plane's wings, suggesting the terrorists were willing to risk everything to complete their mission. As Sarah lined up for her head-on attack run, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The cargo plane's crew had opened their cargo bay doors, revealing the biological weapons dispersal system in preparation for deployment. Metallic nozzles were visible in the opening, designed to spray the deadly agent across a wide area. The terrorists were preparing for immediate release over the next populated area they encountered. Command: Target has opened cargo bay and appears ready for immediate weapon deployment, Sarah reported urgently. I need to disable that engine now or they'll release over the next town. Ground commands. Response was immediate and clear. She was authorized to use any necessary force to prevent the biological weapons release. Sarah armed her most powerful laser system and dove toward the cargo plane at maximum speed. The F-22's engine screamed as she pushed the aircraft beyond normal operational limits. The targeting computer struggled to maintain lock as both aircraft maneuvered violently, but Sarah's experience allowed her to compensate manually for the system's limitations. The two aircraft approached each other at a combined speed of over 1,000 miles per hour. Sarah had one chance to hit the starboard engine's critical components before the closure rate forced her to break off to avoid collision. Her finger hovered over the firing control as the targeting reticle aligned with her intended strike point. At the critical moment, Sarah fired a sustained laser burst directly into the cargo plane's right engine. The beam struck the engine's fuel injection system, causing an immediate and catastrophic failure. The engine exploded in a shower of metal fragments, but the explosion was controlled enough to avoid triggering the biological weapon's release mechanism. The cargo plane immediately lost half its power and began losing altitude rapidly. Sarah pulled her F-22 into a sharp climb to avoid the debris field from the destroyed engine, then circled back to assess the results of her attack. The stolen aircraft was now flying on one engine and clearly struggling to maintain altitude. However, Sarah's relief was short-lived. The cargo plane's crew had not given up. Instead of attempting an emergency landing, they were directing their damaged aircraft toward a small farming community visible in the distance. With only minutes of flight time remaining before their inevitable crash, the terrorists were determined to release the biological weapon over any available target. Command, target is heading for populated area on single engine, Sarah reported. They appear intent on weapon release before impact. The response from ground command was stark. Sarah was cleared to use any means necessary to prevent the aircraft from reaching the community, even if it meant destroying the cargo plane entirely. Sarah realized she faced an impossible choice. She could destroy the aircraft outright, but the resulting explosion might still release some of the biological agent. Alternatively, she could try to force it down in an unpopulated area, but time was running out rapidly. The farming community ahead was home to several hundred families who had no idea death was approaching from the sky above. Sarah's mind raced as she watched the crippled cargo plane limping toward the farming community below. The aircraft was losing altitude steadily, black smoke pouring from its destroyed engine, but it still had enough power and momentum to reach the populated area. She could see individual farmhouses and barns scattered across the landscape, each representing families who would be in mortal danger if the biological weapon was released. A desperate plan formed in her mind. Instead of destroying the aircraft outright, she could use her F-22's superior maneuverability to physically force the cargo plane away from the community. It would be incredibly dangerous, requiring her to fly dangerously close to the larger aircraft and use her jet wash to disrupt its flight path. One miscalculation could result in a mid-air collision that would kill her and still allow the weapon's release. Command, I'm going to attempt to physically redirect the target away from populated areas, Sarah transmitted. Stand by for close proximity maneuvering. Ground Command's response was immediate and concerned, warning her about the extreme risks of such an approach. But Sarah had already committed to the maneuver, diving her F-22 toward the struggling cargo plane. She positioned herself slightly above and behind the cargo plane's left wing, matching its speed and altitude with precision that showcased years of training. The F-22's powerful engines created tremendous turbulence, and Sarah began using this jet wash to push against the larger aircraft's control surfaces. The cargo plane immediately began yawing to the right, away from the farming community. The terrorists realized what she was attempting and began fighting her efforts, using their remaining engine power and flight controls to maintain their original heading. What followed was an aerial wrestling match unlike anything in aviation history, with Sarah's sleek fighter pushing against the much larger cargo plane while both aircraft flew dangerously, close to the ground. Sarah's engineering background proved crucial as she calculated exactly where to position her aircraft for maximum effect. She understood how air currents flowed over different wing designs and used this knowledge to create turbulence that would force the cargo plane off course. Her F-22 danced around the larger aircraft like a wasp harassing a bear. The physical stress on both aircraft was enormous. Sarah could feel her F-22 shuddering as it flew through the cargo plane's turbulent wake, while warning lights began flashing on her instrument panel. The cargo plane was faring worse, with pieces of its damaged structure beginning to separate under the aerodynamic forces. Sarah realized the aircraft might break apart before she could force it away from the community. Suddenly, the cargo plane's pilot made a drastic decision. Instead of continuing toward the farming community, he pitched the aircraft into a steep dive, apparently hoping to release the biological weapon over a less populated area before the aircraft became completely uncontrollable. Sarah followed the dive, her F-22 screaming earthward as she maintained her harassment of the larger aircraft. The ground rushed up at terrifying speed as both aircraft plummeted toward a forested area. Between the farming community and the mountains, Sarah could see a small lake surrounded by dense woods, an area that would minimize casualties if the biological weapon was released. She had to ensure the cargo plane reached that isolated location, rather than pulling out of the dive early. At an altitude of just 2,000 feet, the cargo plane's pilot attempted to level off and begin the weapon release sequence. Sarah responded by positioning her F-22 directly underneath the cargo plane's open bay doors, using her aircraft's heat signature and electromagnetic systems to interfere with the biological weapon's deployment mechanisms. It was an incredibly dangerous position that left her vulnerable to debris from the failing aircraft above. The proximity alarms in Sarah's cockpit were screaming as she flew in formation with the dying aircraft. She could see into the cargo bay above her, where the biological weapons dispensing system was struggling to activate. Her interference was working, but she couldn't maintain this position indefinitely without risking her own aircraft's destruction. The cargo plane suddenly rolled inverted, apparently in a last desperate attempt to dump its deadly cargo directly onto Sarah's aircraft. She reacted instinctively, pulling her F-22 into a violent sideways roll that brought her dangerously close to the forest canopy below. Treetops flashed past her wingtips as she fought to maintain control while avoiding the cargo plane's death throes above her. When Sarah rolled upright and looked up, she saw the cargo plane beginning its final descent toward the lake. One wing had separated completely, and the aircraft was spinning uncontrollably toward the water. The biological weapons dispensing system had been damaged in the violent maneuvers, with metallic debris streaming from the open cargo bay. Command: "Target aircraft is going down in unpopulated area," Sarah reported breathlessly. "Biological weapon deployment system appears damaged and non-functional." She climbed away from the crash site, her F-22's engines carrying her to a safe altitude as the cargo plane disappeared into the forest below. The explosion when the aircraft hit the lake was visible for miles, sending up a massive plume of water and steam. Sarah circled the area, scanning for any signs of biological agent dispersal, but her instruments detected no airborne contaminants. The weapon had been neutralized by the crash or by the damage to its deployment system. As the immediate crisis passed, Sarah felt the full weight of what had just happened. She had prevented a catastrophe that could have killed thousands of people, but in doing so, she had been forced to reveal skills and knowledge that she had kept hidden for 5 years. Her civilian life was about to become much more complicated. The flight back to the classified facility felt like a journey between two different worlds. Sarah's hands remained steady on the F-22's controls, but her mind was churning with the implications of what had just occurred. She had successfully prevented a biological attack that could have devastated the Pacific Northwest. But in doing so, she had stepped back into a life she thought she had left behind forever. As Seattle's skyline appeared in the distance, Sarah realized that Mark would already be awake and wondering where she had gone. Her simple explanation about a work emergency would no longer be sufficient, especially when news reports began covering the morning's dramatic events. The story of a mysterious military aircraft preventing a terrorist attack would be on every news channel within hours. Echo 77, "You are cleared for immediate landing at base," ground command transmitted. "Outstanding work up there. Debriefing will commence upon arrival." Sarah acknowledged the transmission, but her thoughts were focused on the personal consequences of her actions. Saving thousands of lives had been the right choice, but it would come at a significant cost to the quiet existence she had built. The underground hangar looked exactly the same as when she had left it, but Sarah felt fundamentally changed by the morning's events. Ground crew rushed to service the F-22 as she shut down its systems, their efficient movements a reminder of the military precision that had once been her daily reality. The commanding officer who had briefed her earlier approached with obvious relief and gratitude. "Mitchell, that was exceptional flying," the officer said as Sarah climbed out of the cockpit. "Your combination of technical knowledge and piloting skills made the difference between success and catastrophe. The biological weapon has been confirmed neutralized, and early reports suggest no environmental contamination from the crash site." The debriefing process was thorough but efficient. Sarah provided detailed accounts of the engagement, her tactical decisions, and the technical aspects of forcing the aircraft away from populated areas. Military analysts were particularly interested in her assessment of the biological weapons deployment system and how her interference had prevented its activation. As the formal questioning concluded, the commanding officer presented Sarah with an unexpected development. The morning's events had demonstrated the continued value of the classified pilot program, and there was interest in reactivating her military status. They offered her the opportunity to return to active duty with significant rank advancement and assignment to elite units. Sarah listened to the offer with mixed emotions. The F-22 flight had reminded her how much she loved the precision and challenge of military aviation. The sense of purpose and the knowledge that her skills could protect innocent people was deeply satisfying. Yet she had also built meaningful relationships and career satisfaction in her civilian life that she was reluctant to abandon. "I need time to consider this," Sarah replied carefully. "This morning's mission was important, but I have obligations and relationships in my civilian life that I can't simply walk away from." The officer nodded understanding, explaining that she would remain on inactive reserve status while considering their proposal. The drive home through Seattle traffic gave Sarah time to process the morning's events and prepare for difficult conversations ahead. She had saved lives and prevented a catastrophe, but she had also been forced to violate the secrecy that had protected her civilian relationships. Mark and her colleagues would have questions that she might not be able to answer fully. Mark was waiting in their apartment when Sarah arrived, his face a mixture of concern and confusion. News reports were already broadcasting stories about an unidentified military aircraft that had prevented a terrorist attack over the Cascade Mountains. Sarah could see in his eyes that he was beginning to connect her mysterious early morning departure with the dramatic events being reported on television. "Sarah, where were you this morning?" Mark asked directly. "And please don't tell me it was a work emergency. The news is talking about fighter jets and terrorist attacks, and you disappeared before dawn wearing clothes I've never seen before." His voice carried hurt and confusion, but also a determination to understand what was happening. Sarah sat down beside him, her flight suit replaced by civilian clothes, but her mind still processing the transition between her two worlds. She realized that her relationship with Mark had reached a crossroads. She could continue hiding her military background, but doing so would mean building their future on a foundation of deception. Alternatively, she could trust him with the truth and risk everything they had built together. "Mark, there are things about my past that I haven't been able to tell you," Sarah began carefully. "Not because I don't trust you, but because of legal obligations that I made years ago. This morning's events have complicated that situation in ways I'm still trying to understand." She explained as much as she could without violating security protocols, describing her military training and the morning's emergency call. Mark listened with growing amazement and concern, occasionally asking questions that revealed how much her secrecy had affected their relationship. He had sensed that she was holding back important parts of herself, but had never imagined the extent of her hidden skills. The conversation continued for hours, with both of them trying to understand how this revelation would affect their future together. Mark expressed hurt about the deception, but also pride in Sarah's heroic actions and the lives she had saved. Sarah found herself torn between relief at finally sharing her secret and anxiety about the uncertain future it created. As evening approached, Sarah realized that her decision about the military's offer would affect not just her career, but also her relationship with Mark and her entire social circle in Seattle. The quiet life she had built was already changing, and she would need to decide whether to embrace her military identity or find a way to balance both worlds. 3 weeks after the terrorist attack, Sarah found herself standing in the same underground hangar where her morning of crisis had begun. This time, however, she wasn't responding to an emergency call. She was making a choice that would determine the direction of her entire future. The decision had not come easily. In the days following her revelation to Mark, they had engaged in countless conversations about trust, identity, and the kind of life they wanted to build together. Mark had struggled with feeling deceived, but had gradually come to understand the impossible position Sarah had been placed in by her security obligations. More importantly, he had seen how the mission had reawakened something vital in Sarah, that her civilian life had been missing. Sarah's colleagues at Boeing had reacted with a mixture of amazement and newfound respect when news reports revealed that their quiet engineering colleague was responsible for preventing the biological attack. Her supervisor had been particularly stunned, Finally understanding why Sarah had always demonstrated such intuitive knowledge of aircraft systems and flight dynamics. The revelation had actually enhanced her professional reputation rather than damaging it. The military's offer had evolved during the 3 weeks of consideration. Instead of requiring Sarah to choose between her civilian and military identities, they had proposed a unique arrangement. She would continue working as a civilian engineer while maintaining active reserve status for emergency situations. This hybrid role would allow her to contribute to both commercial aviation safety and national security. Standing beside the F-22 that had carried her through the most important mission of her life, Sarah reflected on how the experience had changed her understanding of herself. For 5 years, she had tried to suppress the part of her identity connected to military service. Believing that she needed to choose between her past and her future, the crisis had shown her that both aspects of her identity were valuable and could coexist. Mark had surprised her by not only accepting her decision to maintain military involvement, but actively encouraging it. He had seen how the mission had restored a sense of purpose and vitality that Sarah hadn't even realized she was missing. Their relationship had actually grown stronger through the process of honest communication about her hidden background and their shared future goals. The commanding officer approached Sarah as she completed her final inspection of the aircraft. "Mitchell, are you ready for this arrangement? It's unprecedented, but your unique combination of skills and your performance during the crisis have convinced everyone involved that it's worth trying." Sarah nodded confidently, understanding that she was embarking on a path that few people had ever walked. Her new role would involve monthly training flights to maintain her piloting skills, consultation on aircraft security measures for both military and civilian applications, and availability for emergency situations that required her specific expertise. Sarah would continue living in Seattle, working at Boeing, and building her relationship with Mark, but she would also remain connected to the military community that had shaped her most extraordinary capabilities. The arrangement satisfied Sarah's need for both stability and purpose. She could continue contributing to commercial aviation safety through her engineering work, while also remaining prepared to serve her country in critical situations. The secrecy that had once isolated her was replaced by a more open acknowledgement of her dual role, though specific details of her missions would remain classified. As Sarah prepared for her first official training flight under the new arrangement, she felt a sense of completeness that had been missing from her life for years. She no longer had to choose between different aspects of her identity, or hide fundamental parts of herself from the people she cared about. The terrorist crisis had forced her secret into the open, but in doing so, it had also freed her to embrace all of who she was. Mark arrived at the facility to see her off, having received special clearance to visit the classified location. Watching him interact with military personnel and ask thoughtful questions about her work, Sarah realized how much their relationship had deepened through honesty and mutual support. He was proud of her abilities and supportive of her decision to maintain military involvement. The F-22 responded to Sarah's control inputs with the same precision and power she remembered from the crisis, but now the flight carried different meaning. Instead of being a desperate emergency response, it was the beginning of a new chapter that integrated all aspects of her identity and capabilities. She was no longer hiding her skills or living separate lives in different worlds. As she climbed through the clear Seattle sky, Sarah reflected on how crisis had revealed opportunity. The terrorist attack had threatened to destroy the life she had built, but ultimately it had shown her how to build an even better one. She had learned that authenticity and integration were more valuable than the false security of hidden compartments in her life. Flying over the city she loved, with the knowledge that Mark was waiting for her return, and that her colleagues now understood and respected her full capabilities, Sarah felt truly at home in the sky for the first time in years. Her secret skill was no longer hidden, and she was finally free to be completely herself in all aspects of her life.